2:14 a.m. The ER doors at Coastal Medical Center in Charleston flew open as medics rushed in a stretcher. Cole Mercer, a Navy SEAL, lay unconscious, his Navy uniform soaked with blood, shrapnel tearing across his side. But no one noticed the wounds first. They noticed the dog. Ranger, a German shepherd trained for combat, ran beside the stretcher without breaking stride. His body was rigid, his eyes burned with warning. Every hand that reached toward Cole froze in fear. Doctors shouted. Nurses hesitated. Security stepped forward. Ranger growled. Low, controlled. Not wild, not frantic. He simply refused to leave the man who was his world. One more step, and something terrible was going to happen. Then Harper Lane, a quiet nurse with calm brown eyes and a gentle, steady presence, stepped forward. She did not yell. She did not force anything. She slowly knelt beside Ranger, whispered softly, and spoke to him like someone who understood pain. Ranger stopped. His muscles relaxed. He lowered his head onto Cole's chest, not in defeat, but in faith. The room fell silent. Later, when the surgeons asked Harper how she did it, she simply answered, "Some things are not taught in school." Minutes later, a military vehicle arrived outside the hospital. When the commanding officer stepped in, he didn't ask what happened to Cole. He asked to meet the nurse. Before we tell you what happened next, take 2 seconds to comment where you're watching from, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. Night slid over Jacksonville like a slow tide, warm and heavy with the scent of salt water and asphalt. The hospital near the shoreline stood beneath a restless sky, the clouds drifting like tired ships searching for harbor. The Florida air was thick, humming faintly with distant sirens and the whisper of the Atlantic pressing its breath against the city. And then, just after 2 a.m., the quiet broke as the emergency room doors burst open with a sharp metallic gasp, and the night seemed to lean closer, curious, listening. They rushed in with a stretcher, 2 paramedics in faded Navy scrubs, their movements quick, rehearsed, almost choreographed by fatigue and duty. But the man on the stretcher carried a different weight. His name was Cole Mercer, a Navy SEAL, 36 years old, with a face that wore both strength and sorrow like twin shadows. Cole had the kind of build carved from discipline, broad shoulders, steady frame, a quiet stillness even now as unconsciousness held him. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a simple military style. His skin was sun-touched, the tone of a man who had worked beneath unforgiving skies. And even in this fragile hour, he wore the Navy SEAL everyday uniform, a deep navy shirt pressed and neat, the name Cole stitched small and steady over his heart, matching navy trousers, polished black shoes. The uniform did not turn him into a monument or a figure of war. Instead, it made him look human, reverent, a man who still believed in order, even when the world fell apart. Now his uniform was stained with blood, not from a battlefield, but from a training explosion gone wrong. Jagged tears marked his side. His breathing was shallow, the rhythm breaking in places like cracked glass. His jaw was locked not with tension, but with the invisible echo of discipline refusing to yield. But that was not what stopped the room. Next to the stretcher walked a German shepherd named Bear. Bear was 5 years old, a fully trained service dog with thick fur the color of dark honey poured over iron. Black traced along his back like the shadow of a wing. He was large, powerful in the way mountains are powerful, unmovable, dignified, made for protection. His chest was broad, his stride steady. His eyes, deep amber, burned like embers that refused to go out. Bear did not bark. He did not whine. Instead, he walked so close to Cole that his shoulder brushed the stretcher frame with every step, as though he were holding the world still with the force of his loyalty. Bear had the kind of loyalty that was not loud. It was a promise quietly carved into the soul. He had once been a working K-9 trained for search and rescue, assigned to Cole after a mission injury had left Cole with lingering scars, not only on the body, Since then, something wordless had woven between them. Bear was protective to the point of stubbornness. But he had a gentle patience, too, a soft nudge of the nose when Cole forgot to rest, the way he would lean against the man like a living anchor. The moment the stretcher rolled into the trauma bay, the staff froze. Fluorescent lights glared down, giving the room a pale halo that felt strangely sacred. Monitors beeped softly, carts rattled, voices began to rise. But all movement halted when Bear's body stiffened. He stepped in front of the stretcher, chest squared, head low, teeth not bared, but the message was unmistakable. No one touches him unless I say so. That was when Dr. Lauren Hayes stepped forward. Lauren was in her early 40s, tall with an angular face, softened by kind eyes and faint laugh lines that hinted at warmth she rarely showed when working. Her dark hair was tied neatly, though a few strands had escaped during the long shift. She was respected, decisive, sometimes mistaken as cold, but that was because the job had carved away her softness layer by layer. Years earlier, she had lost her younger sister to a hospital delay. Since then, she had become sharp, efficient, relentless, determined never to lose time again. Her voice came out steady. "We need to move him. Now." A nurse stepped closer, a young man named Daniel Brooks, 26, thin, with nervous hands and a heart too large for the world. He moved gently, but the moment he reached toward Cole, Bear growled. Not wild, not savage. It was a low, controlled sound, like thunder rolling just before a storm breaks. Daniel froze. Another nurse whispered, "That dog is not going to leave him." Behind the reception desk stood Hank Miller, the night security guard. Hank was 67, short and slightly round, with silver hair and the kind of wrinkles that came from equal parts laughter and sorrow. Once, long ago, Hank had served in the Navy himself. Life had aged him into quiet humor and a gentle patience. He watched Bear with deep respect, recognizing something in the dog's posture, the unspoken vow of a soldier refusing to abandon a comrade. "There's loyalty," Hank murmured softly, more to himself than anyone else. "And then there's this." Bear's eyes locked on every hand, every motion, his legs planted like roots into the hospital floor. His body formed a living barrier between Cole and the world. If fear had a shape, this was not it. This was devotion, distilled, sharpened, uncompromising. Lauren exhaled slowly. She had dealt with aggression before. But this was not aggression. This was a guardian, a promise. "Don't startle him," she warned. "Talk softly, move slow." But even as she spoke, the tension began to thicken like humid air before lightning. Security shifted nearer, hands hovered uncertainly. The room balanced on a fragile edge. And then, from down the hall, Emily Carter appeared. Emily was 33, with soft brown hair always tied simply at the back of her neck and quiet hazel eyes that looked like they remembered everything. Her build was slender, almost delicate, yet there was a calm gravity in the way she moved. Emily was a nurse, one who never raised her voice, never lost her composure. Life had shaped her gently but deeply. She had once lost a brother to war, a boy who had gone overseas with bright eyes and returned only as a folded flag. Grief had not hardened her. Instead, it had carved space inside her for compassion, wide, endless, and patient. Emily took one look at Bear and did not see a threat. She saw a soul guarding another. She stepped closer, slow, measured, her footsteps soft as tide foam, sliding over sand. "It's okay," she whispered, though she spoke more to the space between them than to the dog himself. Bear's ears twitched, his muscles tense, but he did not lunge. Emily lowered herself to the floor, so she was level with him. She did not reach out, did not invade the circle of protection he had drawn around Cole. Instead, she simply stayed, breathing slowly, offering nothing but presence. This was not dominance. This was respect. She spoke in a gentle murmur, words steady, rhythmic, like comfort itself. And then, Bear, the guardian, the soldier, the unwavering wall, slowly lowered his head. His body relaxed just enough. He stepped aside, not surrendering, but granting permission. The room exhaled. Hank felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of witnessing something sacred. Lauren met Emily's gaze. There was a shared understanding there, a silent thank you that did not need to be spoken. They moved Cole to the operating table, carefully, respectfully. Bear followed, step for step, never more than an arm's length away. His eyes never left Cole, not once. And somewhere in the sterile hum of machines and whispered commands, a doctor leaned toward another and said under his breath, "That dog is not going to leave him." The night thickened around Jacksonville. The sea breathed in the dark, and within that small, bright room, loyalty stood watch, as steady and unyielding as the tide itself. Emily Carter stopped just inside the trauma room, letting the silence settle around her. The air still carried the echo of Bear's growl, that deep, unwavering warning born not from violence, but from devotion. The lights hummed softly overhead. Machines whispered. And Cole Mercer lay motionless beneath them, his Navy SEAL uniform darkened by blood, his breath fragile but holding on. Emily stepped forward, moving with the kind of calm that people instinctively trusted. She did not rush. She did not command the room. She simply arrived, like quiet after a storm. And the tension shifted, if only slightly. Bear stood locked in place at Cole's side, powerful and still, his amber eyes fixed on every hand that dared drift too close. He did not bare his teeth. He did not lunge. He simply refused to surrender his post. This was not instinct. This was choice. "Doctor," Lauren Hayes gave a short nod toward Emily, acknowledging wordlessly that if anyone could bridge this fragile space between medicine and loyalty, it would be her. Daniel Brooks lingered nearby, trying to steady his breathing, trying not to let his nerves show. At the doorway, Hank Miller watched in silence, an old sailor bearing witness to a promise older than ships or uniforms. Then Megan Alvarez entered the room. She didn't say much, just enough to make clear that time still mattered. Her presence carried purpose. Her eyes flicked briefly to Bear, then back to Cole, weighing risks, weighing needs. But all movement paused the moment Emily knelt. She lowered herself until she was level with Bear, choosing not to touch, not to intrude, only to be present. Her voice came gently, steady, warm, woven from empathy and patience. Bear watched her. There was a flicker, the faintest tremor of uncertainty, then stillness again. But the stillness changed. It softened. Slowly, with deliberate grace, Bear lowered his head and rested it against Cole's chest. The room stopped breathing. Emily offered a small, quiet smile. Not pride, not victory, only understanding. Lauren signaled the team forward. They moved carefully, respectfully, aware they were standing inside something sacred. Daniel's hand steadied. Megan's voice softened. The air shifted from tension to fragile hope. And all the while, Bear remained exactly where he was, his body forming a silent shield, while his heart refused to surrender its watch. Emily stayed near him, grounding the moment with presence alone. Down the hall, Harold Jackson paused for a breath, recognizing the weight of what he glimpsed, then moved on, leaving the moment undisturbed. Outside, the sea rolled beneath the night sky, and thunder murmured somewhere far away. Inside, Cole's breathing steadied. Relief, small but real, drifted through the room. Hank felt it settle into his bones. He had seen vows before, but rarely like this. Somewhere nearby, a soft voice whispered what everyone already knew. That dog will never leave him. Emily heard, and she understood, because love, once sworn, stands its ground. And loyalty, the kind that binds a soul to another, does not retreat. Jacksonville kept breathing. Bear did not move, and the night bowed quietly around that truth. The sky over Charleston had not yet decided between night and morning. A faint silver washed the edges of the clouds, while the harbor breathed its slow, rhythmic sighs. The air outside the Coastal Medical Center felt heavy with salt and waiting. Inside, the hallways were quiet, too quiet, as though the building itself understood that one life was being held delicately between passing storms. Cole Mercer was taken into surgery before the first hint of dawn touched the world. The doors to the operating room closed with a soft echo, sealing him inside a space of bright lights and hushed commands. Beyond those doors, silence became a presence of its own. Ranger lay down just outside, lowering his large frame onto the polished floor. His coat of black and rich amber seemed darker beneath the fluorescent light, like a living shadow at the threshold. He refused food. He refused water. He refused rest. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a promise he would not abandon. His golden eyes never left the closed doors, the world reduced to that single barrier between him and the human he guarded. 2 hours passed, maybe 3. Hospitals have a way of folding time into strange shapes, stretching some moments until they feel endless and letting others vanish like drifting fog. Through it all, Ranger remained still, save for the occasional slow blink, or the soft, low sound that rumbled from his chest when unfamiliar footsteps came too close. Across the hallway sat Harper Lane. She had finished her shift, or rather, her shift had finished without her. She stayed anyway. Her soft chestnut hair was loosely tied back, though loose strands framed her face. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a steadiness there, a lighthouse steadiness, the kind that stays lit even when storms drift through. She did not try to pet Ranger. She did not crowd his space. She simply stayed nearby, a quiet presence keeping watch in her own way. A new nurse came down the hall, carrying charts, pausing briefly to take in the sight. Her name was Claire Robinson. She was around 30, medium height, with sandy blonde hair clipped neatly, and a walk that suggested she was always moving 3 steps ahead of herself. Claire had grown up caring for a mother with chronic illness, and it had carved into her a strong sense of responsibility mixed with deep empathy. She glanced at Ranger, her expression softening. Then she continued on, knowing instinctively that whatever existed between that dog and the closed OR doors was not to be disturbed. Moments later, Samuel Price approached, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He had changed from his security jacket into a plain sweater beneath his badge, but the posture of an old Navy man still lingered in the angle of his shoulders. Lines etched by years of living mapped his face, but his gaze remained warm, weathered by storms, yet never hardened. He sat down slowly beside Ranger, careful not to cross the invisible boundary that loyalty had drawn. "I figured someone here could use company," Samuel said in a quiet, worn voice, the kind of voice that had steadied others through many long nights. Ranger did not look at him. He didn't need to. Samuel took a sip of coffee, letting silence sit with them like an old friend. Then he began to talk, not to fill the space, but to ease the weight pressing on it. "You know," he murmured, "when I was young, I worked the docks. Long before this hospital, before security badges and paperwork. Nights like this were common. The tide would come in, thick and heavy, carrying the kind of quiet you could almost hear. Men would wait for ships that might not return. Wives would sit on porches, with porch lights left on, hoping light could guide boats the way it guides hearts." Ranger's ears twitched slightly. Samuel smiled, a small, patient smile. "I learned something back then," he continued. "Loyalty doesn't make noise. It just stays." Across the hallway, Harper listened, not intrusively, but like wind leaning gently against a window. The story wrapped itself around the space softly. Ranger did not move, but there was a calm beginning to bloom. Claire walked past again. A janitor rolled his cleaning cart down the corridor. Somewhere distant, a monitor beeped, marking heartbeats belonging to other stories. Dawn crept closer. You could feel it. The air itself seemed to brighten in slow breaths. A resident surgeon hurried by, Jack Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with sandy hair and sharp focus. Jack had grown up with a firefighter father and a nurse mother, taught from childhood that courage sometimes wore scrubs. He nodded respectfully toward Ranger and continued on, knowing this was not a moment to interrupt. Harper finally spoke, her voice barely louder than the whisper of the ventilation. "He hasn't moved at all." Samuel nodded. "No," he said, "and I don't think he will." There was no judgment in his tone, only respect. Ranger continued to stare at the surgery doors. In his stillness lived storms, memories, and wordless vows. He did not understand medical terms. He did not understand surgical risks. He only understood presence. That was enough. Harper folded her hands loosely. The early morning light, faint and pearled, began to seep through a window at the end of the hall. It brushed the floor like the first gentle note of a hymn. More staff passed quietly. Some paused. Some whispered. A few wondered aloud how a dog could remain so steadfast. Why this dog? Why this man? Harper knew the truth without needing to say it. Because love had chosen. Because somewhere in the past, on a day probably filled with dust and danger, a soldier and a dog had reached for each other and discovered home. Samuel finished his coffee. He didn't rush. He simply waited with Ranger, the way one loyal soul waits for another. Time slipped forward. The first true light of dawn finally touched Charleston. And Ranger did not take his eyes off the door, as though the wooden frame itself contained the soul of the world. Chapter 3 ends here exactly within the summarized events. The morning sky over Charleston shifted from silver to pale gold as the sun began to climb over the harbor. The city was slowly waking, fishing boats murmuring across the water, gulls stitching their cries into the soft air, traffic beginning to hum like distant bees. Yet inside Coastal Medical Center, time still felt suspended, hovering in the narrow hallway outside the operating room where Ranger continued his quiet vigil. Harper remained seated nearby, her hands resting gently in her lap. Samuel Price had finished his coffee long ago, though he still sat close, the calm presence of an old sailor standing watch beside another. Nurses passed with softer footsteps than usual, as though even sound itself should show respect. Outside the hospital, a dark military SUV pulled up to the curb. The vehicle did not roar. It arrived like a statement, steady, deliberate, carrying a gravity that did not need to announce itself. The driver stepped out first, a young military aide with sharp posture and close-cropped hair. He opened the rear door, and from the shadowed interior emerged Commander Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale was in his early 50s, tall with a presence carved from years of command and responsibility. His hair, once deep chestnut, had begun to gray at the temples, not from age alone, but from nights spent awake making decisions that would echo across lives. His face was strong, but not cold. The lines etched across it spoke of storms weathered in silence. His eyes, a deep steel blue, carried the weight of memory. There was discipline in the way he walked, measured strides that spoke of certainty. But there was also a quiet sorrow that lingered beneath the surface like a tide that never fully recedes. He was a man who had given everything to the service and had lost pieces of himself along the way. Nathan stepped through the hospital entrance. The automatic doors opened with a soft sigh, as though the building itself recognized him. Staff glanced up, not out of fear, but with the instinctive respect that rises in the presence of someone who has walked closer to danger than most ever will. He did not look around. He already knew where he was going. His boots carried him down the hallway toward the operating wing with the inevitability of history reaching its next page. When he turned the final corner, he saw Ranger lying before the closed doors. He stopped. Something in his expression changed. Not shock, not surprise, but recognition. A memory flickered behind his eyes, carried on the scent of salt and cordite, carried on the echo of gunfire in distant countries and nights that never ended. Harper looked up. She did not know his name, but she recognized his bearing. She stood, offering a respectful nod. Nathan returned it with quiet courtesy. Samuel rose as well, shoulders straightening slightly, acknowledging another man who had worn the uniform long enough to understand the unspoken language between soldiers. Nathan's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady. "Cole Mercer," he said softly. Not a question, a statement born from concern. Harper nodded once. "He's in surgery," she replied, her tone calm but honest. "They're doing everything they can." Nathan's gaze shifted to Ranger. The German shepherd remained still, golden eyes locked on the doors. But something passed between man and dog, a recognition of shared loyalty, of oaths that did not break. A faint sadness ghosted across Nathan's features. He knelt, slowly, not to command, but to honor. "Hello, old friend," he murmured. Harper watched him carefully, sensing there was history here, deep and rooted. Nathan rested one hand on his knee, never reaching toward the dog without permission. He simply existed beside him, allowing Ranger to choose. Ranger's ears lifted slightly. He did not move away. He did not growl. He simply acknowledged. Nathan exhaled, a breath that carried years. Then he spoke. His words were not for everyone, but they were true enough to fill the space. "You're not just a service dog," he said gently. "You're his partner." Samuel listened quietly. Harper remained still. The hallway felt almost like a chapel, where silence was prayer. Nathan stood again, and then, for the first time, he spoke to them. "Cole once saved this dog's life." His voice did not rise. It remained steady, woven with both pride and pain. "It was during a mission overseas," he continued. "Chaos, smoke, the kind of night that strips the world of sound except for orders and heartbeat. Ranger was brought in as part of the unit, but things went wrong." Harper held her breath. Nathan's eyes drifted toward the past. "There was an explosion," he said quietly. "Debris, fire. Ranger was trapped. The team was ordered to retreat. But Cole—" A faint, almost broken smile touched his lips. "Cole does not abandon those he loves." Ranger blinked slowly, as though he remembered. Nathan nodded toward him. He went back, alone, through smoke and shrapnel. He dug Ranger out himself, carried him out, shielded him from the blast. He paused. "And from that day forward—" The sentence did not need to finish. It settled into the air like truth. Ranger remained still, a living testament to that unfinished line. Harper felt something warm gather behind her eyes. Not pain, but a strange sweetness. Loyalty had chosen these two beings and tied them together like a knot the world could not undo. Nathan's gaze softened. "They don't just work together," he said. "Their hearts beat in rhythm." Samuel nodded, as though he had known this all along. Ranger shifted, just slightly, as though acknowledging the memory. Nathan then fell into quiet reflection. You could sense he carried his own ghosts, his own list of names written in the private ledger of the heart. But today was not about him. It was about Cole, about the man who had chosen love over orders, about the dog who had chosen love in return. The hallway remained still. Outside, the sun rose higher, spilling warm light across Charleston's harbor, gilding the water until it looked like liquid gold. But inside these walls, time held its breath a little longer. The world seemed to bow reverently around this silent exchange between a commander, a nurse, an old sailor, and a dog whose loyalty needed no translation. Nathan finally spoke again. "We wait," he said softly. There was no command in it, only devotion. And they did. Together, because they understood now. Cole was not simply Ranger's handler, and Ranger was not simply Cole's dog. They were brothers forged in fire, bound by choice, and carried forward by love. And from that day in the storm, their hearts had never stopped beating together. Chapter 4 ends here, exactly within the summarized events. The day moved gently into afternoon. The Charleston sky washed in pale blue, with thin clouds drifting lazily above the harbor. Warm sunlight spilled across the floors of Coastal Medical Center, turning the polished tiles into soft mirrors. Yet the corridor outside the operating room remained its own small world, bound together by silence, hope, and the steady devotion of a German shepherd who refused to leave his post. Harper Lane sat quietly near Ranger, her hands resting in her lap, her posture calm, her presence steady. She did not try to speak to him. She did not try to pet him. She simply existed beside him, the way a lighthouse keeps watch. Constant, unwavering, meant for the night more than the day. Ranger occasionally shifted his weight, but his golden eyes never drifted from the operating room doors. If breath itself could take the shape of loyalty, it would have looked very much like him. Commander Nathan Hale stood a short distance away, speaking briefly with a doctor before falling silent once more. There was nothing he could do but wait. Samuel Price remained seated on the other side of the hall, leaning forward slightly, his weathered hands folded loosely. They all waited together, bound not by words, but by the same fragile thread of concern. Across the corridor, a volunteer paused by the reception desk. Her name was Lily Anderson. She was 22, small and softly built, with strawberry blonde hair usually tied into a loose ponytail. She had gentle eyes and a voice that rarely rose above a murmur. Lily had lost her father in a car accident when she was 17, and since then she had chosen to spend her free time helping at the hospital, believing in her quiet way that kindness was something you gave back to the world when it had taken something from you. She looked at Ranger with a sort of wonder, then at Harper, and something inside her softened. She returned to her work, carrying the image with her like a story she would never forget. Harper remained still, but something inside her began to stir. Because while Ranger guarded the door, Harper guarded something else, something she had carried for years. Her brother's laughter used to fill entire rooms. He had been younger by 3 years, tall and lean with a smile that always made things feel less heavy. His name had been Matthew. He had joined the military not out of glory, but out of a sense of purpose that burned quietly in his chest. Harper had hugged him goodbye one afternoon beneath a sky just as blue as today's. He had promised to come home. Promises, she later learned, did not always return. Letters came, then fewer. Then silence, and finally a car in the driveway and uniforms at her mother's kitchen table. The world had gone very quiet after that. Harper learned that broken hearts didn't always make noise. She went into nursing not because she believed she could stop loss, but because she wanted to stand between people and the moment it arrived. She could not save Matthew, but maybe someday she could be the difference between grief and relief for someone else. That hope had become her compass. She watched Ranger carefully now. His devotion was not loud. It did not demand applause. It stayed. Harper felt an ache bloom inside her chest, a soft ache, not of pain, but of recognition. She had known that kind of loyalty once, and she had lost it. Slowly, she moved just a little closer, not enough to intrude, only enough to be near. Ranger did not turn his head, but his ears shifted ever so slightly, acknowledging her presence. The air between them felt fragile, like spun glass, yet also deeply strong. From further down the corridor, a hospital chaplain passed quietly. His name was Thomas Grant. He was in his late 40s, with sandy brown hair already touched by silver, and a face that held more listening than speaking. He had chosen his work after surviving a serious illness that had nearly taken him in his 20s. Since then, he had spent his life helping others carry their invisible burdens. Thomas slowed his steps briefly, offering Harper and Ranger a nod of gentle respect before moving on. The day grew brighter, but grief does not always obey sunlight. Harper folded one hand gently against her chest as a memory surfaced. A memory of sitting in a quiet kitchen with her mother, both of them holding cups of untouched tea. Silence had been their only language then. She remembered thinking that if someone could just sit with them, without trying to fix anything, the silence might have hurt less. That was what she now offered Ranger. Companionship, not command, not control, just presence. Commander Nathan Hale glanced toward Harper with a look of quiet understanding. He saw the way she sat, the way Ranger trusted her enough to allow her near. He wondered what story rested inside her heart, but he did not ask. Some stories are not meant to be opened in hallways beneath hospital lights. Some stories deserve to stay wrapped in silence until the soul is ready. Ranger finally shifted. Not much, just enough to exhale more deeply. It was the first sign that he was allowing Harper into the small sacred circle of his watch. She noticed, but she did not smile in triumph. She simply breathed with him. Lily walked past again, carrying fresh linens. She paused, watching the scene with soft eyes, the dog, the nurse, the quiet devotion knitting them together. To her, it looked like faith. Samuel eventually stood and stretched, his joints protesting with small cracks. He gave Harper a warm nod before stepping away briefly to check on the entrance. Ranger's gaze flicked toward the movement, then back to the doors. His entire body spoke the same truth. He would not leave. Ever. And Harper knew, without anyone needing to say it, that Ranger did not simply trust humans by default. He trusted souls he recognized as safe. Slowly, gently, that trust was extending to her. The realization settled inside her like a small blessing. Not loud, not dramatic, just healing, the way dawn slowly replaces night. She whispered softly then, more breath than sound. "It's all right. You're not alone." Ranger didn't move, but something in the air changed. It grew warmer, lighter. The afternoon drifted onward. Doctors moved in and out of rooms. Nurses carried charts. Conversations whispered through the hallways like small streams weaving through stones. But here, in this little stretch of floor before a closed operating room door, a new kind of quiet had formed. One where trust breathed, where grief bowed its head, where devotion stood strong and steady. Commander Nathan Hale remained nearby, watching the bond forming between nurse and dog. He understood what it meant for someone with wounds of their own to still find room for compassion. He respected it deeply, though he said nothing. Ranger rested his head on his paws at last, still facing the door, still guarding, but calmer now. And Harper, for the first time in years, felt something inside her loosen, only slightly, like the first crack of light slipping beneath a closed door. Trust, she realized, did not always arrive when called. Sometimes it came quietly, like a blessing, like a sunrise. And in that stillness she silently thanked Ranger, not for trusting her, but for reminding her that love could return in new forms, even after it had once broken her heart. The afternoon softened toward evening, the Charleston sky turning the color of faded peaches as sunlight filtered through the tall hospital windows. Coastal Medical Center was steeped in that fragile hush that often comes before something important happens, when even footsteps sound more careful, and conversations fall to whispers without anyone realizing why. Harper Lane remained seated near Ranger, her quiet presence a steady anchor in the slowly changing light. Commander Nathan Hale stood nearby, hands folded loosely behind his back. Samuel Price returned to the hallway after briefly checking the entrance downstairs. Everything felt strangely still, as if the world had paused to listen. Then the silence cracked. Somewhere down the corridor, alarms sounded, not loud at first, but sharp enough to send a jolt through the air like sudden lightning. Nurses broke into a run. A doctor's voice rose, controlled but urgent. The doors to the operating room slid open a few inches as a figure leaned out to call for additional equipment. Ranger lifted his head. His entire body went alert in an instant, not panicked, not frenzied, but focused. The kind of focused that comes from instinct and deep burning connection. He stood, muscles gathering beneath his coat of black and amber, and stared through the narrow window of the operating room door. A beat of silence. Then he barked. It was not a violent bark. It was not the roar of threat he had given earlier in the night. This sound was different, sharp but clear, ringing through the hallway, like a church bell breaking the early morning fog. One bark, then another, short, precise, measured, as if he were announcing something the rest of the world had not yet seen. Harper rose at once, her heart leaping to her throat. Nathan stepped forward, brows lowering in concern. Samuel froze, eyes narrowing as he watched the dog with the sharp intuition of someone who had learned long ago to listen deeply. Ranger barked again. Then he moved closer to the door, nose lifting, ears forward, body tense with purpose, not fear. He let out a low whine, his gaze fixed on the room beyond the glass. It sounded like pleading. It sounded like urgency. It sounded like he knew. Inside the operating room, Dr. Lillian Monroe leaned over Cole Mercer's still form. Dr. Monroe was in her early 50s, tall and composed, with silver beginning to streak through her dark hair. Years of trauma surgery had shaped her into a woman who carried authority like armor, but kindness remained visible in the soft corners of her eyes. She had once lost a patient early in her career when a hidden bleed went undetected until it was too late. A mistake she had vowed would never happen again. Now she saw the monitor dip. Cole's blood pressure trembled like a flame struggling against wind. Something was wrong, but nothing obvious presented itself. Outside, Ranger's barking sharpened, echoing down the hallway. Harper's breath quickened as she realized this sound was not alarm. It was communication. It was warning. Dr. Monroe looked up sharply toward the window. Through the small gap in the blinds, she saw the outline of the German shepherd, ears tall, body coiled with concern, eyes blazing with a strange knowing. She had heard the stories, service dogs sensing things no machine could. She glanced at the surgical field again. Something did not feel right. Near the base of Cole's rib cage, hidden beneath swollen tissue and earlier dressings, there was a subtle rise, a small bulge almost invisible at first glance, a place where pressure should not exist. "Stop," she said calmly, but with quiet force. Everyone froze. Ranger let out one more focused, steady bark. Harper pressed a hand to her heart. Nathan's jaw tightened. Samuel bowed his head slightly, not in fear, but in reverence for what he understood was happening. Dr. Monroe gently pressed her gloved fingers near the hidden swelling. A fresh bloom of blood welled up, slow but steady. There it was, a tear, small, hidden, deadly, missed by chance, caught by loyalty. "We found it," she announced, her voice controlled, yet threaded with relief. "There's an internal tear. Clamp. Suction. Now." The room burst into motion, precise, coordinated, controlled. Outside, Ranger fell silent. He stood perfectly still, golden eyes steady, as if he knew that his message had been received. Harper's vision blurred with sudden tears. She did not try to fight. Nathan exhaled, a breath that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside his chest, a place long wrapped in shadow. Samuel closed his eyes. Minutes passed. Careful hands worked. Machines steadied. Life reached for life. And then the monitors smoothed. The numbers lifted. Cole's pulse stabilized. Faint at first, then stronger. Strong enough to sound like hope. Inside the operating room, Dr. Monroe paused, her eyes closing for one brief second. A silent thank you whispered only to herself. Then she continued. Outside the room, a nurse hurried past and stopped mid-stride, drawn by the sight of the dog standing motionless like a guardian carved in living stone. Others gathered quietly, not crowding but standing at a respectful distance. Whispers drifted. That dog saved him. He knew. How was that possible? Fear had left their voices. In its place grew something else. Respect. Harper slowly knelt down beside Ranger. She did not reach out immediately. She waited. After a moment, he turned his head toward her. His eyes were still alert, still watching. But in them was something softer too. Trust. Recognition. A shared understanding that neither needed words to explain. "It's all right," Harper whispered gently. "You did it." Nathan stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "That wasn't luck." Samuel nodded. "No," he said quietly. "That was love." New footsteps approached then, measured, thoughtful. A woman stopped at the edge of the hallway. Her name was Dr. Elaine Porter, the hospital administrator. She was in her late 40s, small and composed, with dark hair neatly brushed back and sharp yet compassionate eyes. She had lost her husband to cancer 6 years earlier, and since then she had tried to run the hospital not only with policy, but with heart. She watched the scene silently, taking in Ranger's posture, Harper's calm presence, Nathan's solemn respect. "I've been here a long time," she said softly, "but I've never seen anything like this." Nathan inclined his head in acknowledgement. "It's not something you see," he replied. "It's something you feel." Elaine looked at Ranger, then at the closed operating room doors. "I think," she murmured, "we owe him more than fear." Harper smiled, small, grateful. Ranger lowered himself back to the floor, his gaze returning to the window. His duty was not over. But the storm inside him had calmed. He had spoken his warning. He had been heard. Minutes passed. Then, finally, the operating room doors opened. Dr. Monroe stepped out, fatigue etched across her expression. But beneath it, relief glowed quietly. She removed her cap and took a breath before speaking. "He's stable," she said. The words felt like sunlight. Harper closed her eyes. Samuel exhaled. Nathan simply nodded once, but the gratitude in that single movement felt immense. Dr. Monroe glanced at Ranger. "He may have saved his life," she added softly. Ranger did not bask in it. He did not preen or react. He simply stayed. Because that was his calling. The staff looked at him differently now, no longer a threat, but a guardian, a partner, a hero in fur and silent devotion. And respect, gentle, reverent respect, settled into every corner of the hallway like soft light rising through stained glass. Chapter 6 ends here exactly within the summarized events. Evening settled slowly over Charleston, dipping the harbor in soft shades of rose and amber. The windows of Coastal Medical Center caught the fading light, turning it into quiet reflections across the corridors. The day had been long, heavy with fear and relief, and now the building seemed to breathe more gently. Cole Mercer was alive, still fragile, still held together by careful hands and steady machines, but alive. And because of that, there was a warmth in the air, subtle, tender, like the distant echo of a hymn. Ranger remained just outside recovery, lying with his head lifted and ears relaxed, no longer braced for storm, but still alert. Harper Lane sat nearby, calmer now, as though a knot inside her chest had finally loosened. Commander Nathan Hale stood not far away, leaning lightly against the wall with the posture of a man deep in thought. Samuel Price had returned from his brief break, a cup of tea replacing the coffee in his hand, softer now, like the day itself. Word had begun to spread through the hospital. Not gossip, not rumor, just a story traveling gently from person to person. A story about a dog who had refused to abandon his partner. A story about a bark that might have saved a life. And now, staff who passed the hallway did so with softened eyes and slower steps, offering respect rather than suspicion. But there was still something unspoken lingering in the air, and it was Nathan who finally gave it voice. He stepped closer to the small group that had naturally formed. Harper seated in her quiet watch, Samuel steady and kind, Lily Anderson hovering nearby with gentle curiosity, and Dr. Elaine Porter listening with thoughtful interest. Nathan's gaze settled on Ranger first, then on the door to Cole's room, then finally on the people gathered. "They deserve to know," he said in a voice that did not command, but carried weight all the same. Harper nodded softly. Samuel folded his hands. Lily leaned in just slightly, careful not to intrude. Nathan drew in a slow breath, and the past began to return, not as a flood, but as a slow tide, carrying fragments of memory ashore. "It happened overseas," he said. "Another mission, another night when the world felt narrowed to shadows and heartbeat." A new staff member joined them then, Martha Collins, a middle-aged charge nurse with streaks of silver in her dark curls. Martha was sturdy, practical, with a face that rarely hid emotion. She had raised 2 daughters alone after losing her husband to a factory accident when she was 30. Since then, she had learned to carry both strength and compassion in equal measure. She listened now, eyes softening as Nathan spoke. He continued. "There was a firefight, fast, brutal, smoke thick enough to turn the air into darkness. Cole was moving with his team when a blast went off near a building. Ranger was inside searching. The explosion collapsed part of the structure. Ranger did not move, but his eyes, golden and deep, seemed to hold that night like a reflection. Debris came down, Nathan said quietly, and one of the burning beams fell. His jaw tightened, not from anger, but memory. Cole didn't hesitate, not for a second. He threw himself over Ranger. Harper pressed her lips together gently, eyes soft. Samuel bowed his head. Lily swallowed. Martha lifted a hand to her heart. Just for a moment. Nathan's voice went quieter still. He took the hit, shielded him from the impact. His back was burned, his ribs fractured. He nearly didn't make it back. He paused, letting the truth breathe. But Ranger refused to leave him, even when more fire broke out, even when the air burned and bullets fell like rain. He dragged Cole out, piece by piece, a step at a time, until the others reached them. He looked at Ranger then, not as an officer, but as a man humbled by what love can look like when stripped of everything except loyalty. "They saved each other," he said softly, "not once, not twice, but in ways that don't fit neatly into after-action reports." The hallway fell into reverent silence, not heavy, holy. Harper blinked, not out of sadness, but awe. Because devotion, when spoken aloud, can soften even the most guarded heart. Samuel's voice came gently then, steady as an anchor line. "That explains it," he said. "Why he hasn't left." Nathan nodded. "They don't think of themselves as separate," he replied. "Not man and dog, not handler and canine. They are one life carried in 2 bodies." A soft laugh, fragile but warm, slipped from Martha. "There are some kinds of love," she said, "that don't need words." Harper smiled faintly. Lily wiped at her eyes, surprised to find tears there. Further down the hall, Harold Jackson the custodian paused in quiet respect. Even those who heard only pieces of the story seemed to understand the truth beneath it. Ranger finally shifted, moving just enough to rest his head more comfortably along the floor. His body relaxed, but his gaze remained fixed toward Cole's room, steady, promising, unwavering. Nathan watched him. He would walk into fire again, he said quietly, and Cole would do the same. Neither of them knows how to let the other go. Samuel chuckled softly under his breath, not mocking, but touched. Some bonds outlive fear, he murmured. Harper turned her gaze toward the closed door as a soft warmth filled her chest. She thought of her brother. She thought of those moments when love remained behind even after its presence was gone. And she felt gratitude, not bitter, not aching, but peaceful. The evening light deepened outside, turning gold to amber, amber to soft dusk blue. Lights flickered on across the harbor. The hospital windows glowed like lanterns floating above the water. A nurse walked by slowly, pausing just long enough to whisper. That dog would follow him anywhere. Nathan answered without looking away. He already has. And in the stillness that followed, everyone seemed to understand. This loyalty had not been trained into Ranger. It had been chosen, forged, given freely. And in a world where promises often broke, that simple truth felt like grace. Ranger breathed out slowly, a sound that felt almost like contentment. Inside the room, Cole slept on, held by medicine, machines, and the devotion of a soul who had sworn silently to never leave his side. And just like that, the story settled deeper into every heart present, not as myth, but as a reminder that love sometimes walks on four legs, speaks without words, and guards us even when we cannot guard ourselves. Chapter 7 ends here exactly within the summarized events. Morning arrived softly over Charleston, the harbor wrapped in pale gold and the scent of salt carried gently through the breeze. The city began to stir awake beneath a sky washed clean by night. Inside Coastal Medical Center, the first rays of sunlight slid through the high windows and laid themselves across the quiet hallway outside recovery. The hallway that had, for so long, belonged to fear, longing, and unwavering devotion. Today, it would finally belong to joy. Cole Mercer opened his eyes. It happened quietly. No dramatic surge, no frantic cry. Just a slow flutter, like a leaf turning toward light. Machines hummed softly beside him. Warm air drifted through a barely opened window. And the world returned, one breath at a time. He blinked, confused at first, the blur of ceiling tiles slowly sharpening into focus. Pain lingered, not sharp, but deep and distant, like the echo of a departing storm. For a moment he could not place himself. Then memory began to stitch together, training grounds, an explosion, darkness, and then something else, warmth, pressure, a presence at the edge of life, refusing to let go. He turned his head, slowly, and saw Ranger. The German shepherd had curled himself as closely as hospital rules would allow, resting along the side of the bed with quiet devotion. His golden eyes were half-lidded from exhaustion, yet completely awake beneath it. When he realized Cole was conscious, his ears lifted, not sharply, but with reverence, like a hymn rising. A soft sound escaped him, more breath than bark. And then, very gently, he placed his head across Cole's forearm. His body trembled, not from fear, but from joy held in for too long. Cole exhaled, shaky, dissteady, and a weak smile touched his lips. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice rough as weathered stone, softened by years of sea wind. Ranger's tail moved once, slow, reverent, like the turning of a page. Harper Lane stood at the doorway, watching the reunion with eyes warmed by tears that held no pain. She did not enter at first. This moment, she knew, belonged to them. Light framed her softly, like a guardian presence rather than an interruption. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years, as if something broken had finally begun to knit itself whole again. Commander Nathan Hale stood beside her. He did not speak, He did not need to. His posture was formal, respectful, yet softened by unmistakable relief. A quiet pride lived in his eyes. Not pride for victory, but for survival, for loyalty, for love that had chosen to stay. Samuel Price leaned against the wall, further down the corridor, hands tucked into his pockets. He let out a breath, slow, steady, like a sailor finally reaching shore after a journey that once seemed endless. A few moments passed before Harper finally entered the room. She approached with gentle steps, her voice soft. "Welcome back," she said. Cole turned his head toward her, his expression grateful, half smile, half ache. He did not yet have the strength for many words, but his eyes, steady, warm, said enough. Ranger remained still, soaking in the closeness he had fought the entire world to keep. Days passed. Slowly, carefully, Cole's strength returned. Physical therapy began. The pain gradually loosened its grip. The bandages came off one by one. Ranger walked beside him through every hallway, every step, like a shadow stitched to his side by invisible thread. Staff members who once feared the dog now greeted him with soft smiles and gentle nods. Lily Anderson sometimes offered him a biscuit with shy kindness. Martha Collins would pause for a moment at the doorway each morning just to see them together. Respect grew. So did peace. When the day finally came for discharge, the sky over Charleston stretched wide and blue, as if the world itself wished to send Cole off beneath open light rather than shadow. Cole stood at the hospital entrance, slower than before, still healing, but whole. He wore simple clothing, clean and pressed, carrying the quiet dignity of a man who had met darkness and returned. Ranger stood beside him, alert, proud, steadfast. Commander Nathan Hale clasped Cole's shoulder, steady, fraternal. No speeches were exchanged, only a nod, only gratitude, only a silent promise that though war had shaped them, it would not define what remained. Harper approached then. She smiled, the kind of gentle smile that reaches not just the mouth, but the soul. Cole held her gaze for a moment longer than politeness required, a shared understanding passing between them. Healing, loss, courage, and the quiet grace of simply choosing to stay. "Thank you," he said simply. "For both of you," her eyes answered. Samuel stood nearby, holding a small paper bag. Inside was a slice of homemade apple pie. He handed it over with a light chuckle. "Every soldier needs pie on the road to recovery," he said. Cole laughed, weak but real. Ranger wagged his tail. And then, with the soft sun guiding their path, they left the city behind. They moved to the outskirts of Charleston, to a modest home where the grass rolled out in green waves and the wind carried laughter instead of memory. There were trees that whispered in late afternoon breezes. There were long fields where Ranger could run without tether. There were quiet porches meant for evenings with tea and silence. Harper visited sometimes. She brought warmth with her. Samuel came by with apple pie, still insisting that recovery required dessert. Nathan called, not as a commander, but as a friend, checking in without ever prying. And Ranger? He lived the rest of his days as he had lived every moment before, by Cole's side. The war did not disappear, but it faded. It released its grip on hearts once held too tightly. There was space now, for laughter, for stillness, for healing that moved gently, like sunlight through trees. Their story did not become legend. It became something quieter, something better. A life, a friendship, a love beyond language. And in the quiet of one ordinary morning, beneath an endless blue sky, Cole looked out across the field and felt, for the first time in longer than memory, that he had finally come home. In the quiet after the storms of their lives, Cole and Ranger became more than a story. They became a reminder A reminder that sometimes God sends His miracles not as thunder in the sky, but as loyalty that refuses to walk away. Sometimes grace arrives on 4 paws and rests its head upon a wounded hand. And sometimes the truest prayers are spoken in silence, where love simply chooses to stay. Their journey teaches that faith is not always loud. It can be patient. It can be steady. It can look like devotion that endures through fire and returns with the dawn. And perhaps, in the way their hearts learn to heal, one can glimpse the gentle touch of heaven. Not dramatic, not forced. Just quietly present, like God watching over those who are hurting, whispering that they are not alone. In everyday life, this lesson walks beside all of us. In the moments when strength fades, in the days when we feel lost, in the nights when fear lingers longer than light. Faith tells us there is always hope beyond the horizon, that God still works in simple acts of love, and that loyalty, kindness, and courage are among the greatest blessings we can offer one another. If this story touched your heart, you are invited to share it so the message of hope may travel further. Leave a comment, join the conversation, and subscribe so more souls may find encouragement. And if you believe that God still places small miracles in this world, whisper a simple prayer for Cole, for Ranger, and for all who serve and sacrifice. May the Lord bless every reader who has walked this journey with them. And if you feel the faith stirring softly within you, write one word in the comments, Amen.